Hey everyone, Chris here, and welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to talk to you about the books I read between October 5th and October 11th. First up, I read Circus Mirandas by Cassie Beasley, and I gave this book 4.5 stars. In this book, we're following Micah, and he's been raised by his grandfather, and unfortunately, his grandfather is sick. All his life, Micah has been told about Circus Mirandas, a magical circus that contains a bird woman, an invisible tiger, and the man who can bend light. His awful great aunt is staying with them to help take care of his grandfather, and she highly disapproves of Micah's belief in magic. His grandfather, despite being so sick, is determined to contact Circus Mirandas as he is owed a miracle by the Lightbringer. But because he's so sick, it falls to Micah and his new friend Jenny to track down Circus Miranda and the Lightbender to help get his grandfather's miracle. I really love this book. I really like the illustrations that are in it. They're not often, but when they do come up, I really thought they added to the book. I love getting to see Micah's relationship with his grandfather and how worried Micah is about his grandfather and what is going to happen with his grandfather being so sick. His aunt is a giant jerk, but I think that adds to the story of her not believing in magic and her brother being so sure there is magic and that kind of pull and push on Micah. It is interesting to see his friendship with Jenny develop because Jenny is very science and logic based, so she has a hard time believing in magic, but Micah is her friend, so she is trying to find that balance between, I take things very literally, but Micah's my friend, and Micah seems certain that this circus is a thing, and that if he just finds the Lightbender, he can get the miracle that is owed his grandfather, and his grandfather will somehow be okay. I really loved the circus, and getting to see this magical circus that his grandfather has been telling Micah about his whole life, and Micah's reaction to finally being in this place that has only existed in stories for him. I really enjoyed this book and cannot wait to check out the sequel. Next up, I read The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton, and I gave this book 4 stars. In this book, we follow a man who has been tasked with solving a murder, and each day he wakes up in a different body as a guest at the party where Evelyn was killed. He has to use the information he gathers from each of these bodies to determine who the murderer is. So this book was way more wild than I thought it was. It is one I have heard talked about a lot on BookTube, and boy, were there some twists in this book I was not expecting. It was super intriguing to see how this book played out and how this man who is living a different day in all of these different bodies and seeing this day through so many different perspectives is having to try to piece together all of the information he has to solve the crime of what happened to Evelyn. And it is also interesting to see how he grows to care about Evelyn throughout the course of this book, because as he goes through this, he more and more wishes he could find a way to prevent Evelyn from dying in the first place. And like I said, there's a lot of twists I did not see coming and was not expecting, so this book ended up being a lot more of a wild ride than I expected it to be. I also listened to the audiobook of this, and I really enjoyed the audiobook. If it sounds interesting, I would highly recommend it, because like I said, there were twists and turns I didn't see coming, and this book, while already not being a straightforward thing since he's waking up every day in a different body, was far less straightforward than I expected it to be, even based on that premise. So it was a really interesting book, and I'm really glad that I decided to pick it up. Next up, I read The 12th Candle by Kim Tomzik, and I gave this book 3.5 stars. So in this book, we're following Sage, who believes her life has been cursed, which has set her at odds with a classmate named Priscilla. When things go wrong with Sage, they tend to go right for Priscilla, and vice versa. And in Sage's book, things go right for Priscilla far more than they go right for Sage. Sage really does blame the curse for all the bad things that have happened to her. So when Sage ends up with a magical candle on her 12th birthday, she essentially wishes to reverse the curse. However, things don't go as planned, and when things really start to go wrong, she has no choice but to team up with Priscilla to try to end the curse once and for all. So I thought this was an interesting premise, and it was definitely interesting to see Sage try to blame all of the bad things in her life on the curse and all of the good things in Priscilla's life, again, on this curse. And it was also interesting when she reversed the curse and things started to change, that she kind of got to see things from Priscilla's perspective and realized that maybe things weren't as great in Priscilla's life as they appeared from the outside. And it was also interesting getting to see her deal with the ramifications of having reversed this curse, because it made her appreciate the good things in her life a little bit more, because some of those good things were taken from her. I thought this was like a cute contemporary middle grade with like a fantasy twist, and I definitely like Kim Tomzik's writing. She has a really easy writing style that is really easy to get into, and the book flows really well, so they're quick to get through. This wasn't my favorite middle grade, but I definitely enjoyed it, and if you have a middle grader in your life and this sounds like the type of book they would be into, I would definitely recommend it because, like I said, it was interesting. It's just not one I could necessarily see myself rereading, hence why it only got 3.5 stars, but I did enjoy it, and like I said, it was interesting to see Sage try to deal with making this wish to reverse the curse and realizing that maybe, just maybe, not everything in her life was awful because of the curse, and that there were good things in her life too that maybe she didn't appreciate as much as she should have. Next up, I read The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner, and I gave this book 4.25 stars. This book has multiple POVs, and one of them we're following Nella, who owns an apothecary in 1791. And she uses this apothecary to make medicines for women, but also medicine for desperate women who are looking to kill the men in their life that are causing them strife or trouble or issues. She really is just trying to, in general, whether in a above board or secretive way, make women's lives better using her knowledge of medicine. Then we meet 12-year-old Eliza, who goes to Nella's apothecary for help for her mistress in eliminating her mistress's husband. In current day, we follow Caroline, who has recently discovered that her husband has been cheating on her and is struggling with her feelings on that. She ends up finding an apothecary bottle and ends up digging into the past of that bottle and comes up with some interesting discoveries. So I really enjoyed reading this book and seeing how the timelines were woven together, because I think it's pretty obvious that the apothecary bottle that Caroline finds is from the apothecary that Nella owned in 1791. But it is interesting seeing Caroline discover things about that apothecary and that bottle and Nella, and at the same time be seeing Nella's point of view and what is happening to Nella and Eliza and how their relationship develops in the past. It was interesting to see Nella's philosophy on I just want to help women, even if it means helping them kill men, because she's not killing innocent men. Usually these men have done something to wrong the women in their life, and it's interesting to see how Nella ended up in this situation and her motivations for helping these desperate women. It is also interesting to see how Eliza kind of factors into this book, because you wouldn't think a 12-year-old girl would make sense as part of this novel, but she is an intricate piece to the puzzle, and I think that is very, very interesting. I really enjoyed this book, and there was definitely a twist at the end that I didn't see coming that had my jaw on the floor, and I can definitely see myself reading more from Sarah Penner in the future, as I really enjoyed her writing style, and I really enjoyed this book. Next up, I read The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman, and I gave this book 4.25 stars. In this book, we follow 4 people who are in their 70s and live at a retirement village: Joyce, Ron, Elizabeth, and Ibrahim. They gather weekly to discuss unsolved crimes, and they refer to themselves as the Thursday Murder Club. A local developer is soon found dead with an interesting photograph next to his body, and the Thursday Murder Club has their first live case and decide to dive into this case and see if they can figure out who killed the local developer before they hurt anybody else. So I thought this was an interesting twist on the murder mystery genre, as it was very different to see these older individuals trying to solve this crime and how they managed to gather information using their years of experience and connections. I thought it was interesting to see how they interacted with the local police who had caught the case, and one of our points of view is actually one of the cops, and it is interesting to see how she deals with this group of 70-year-olds who are trying to help her solve this case, and knowing they're looking into the murder and trying to balance them looking into things and them actually being helpful with knowing that she probably shouldn't be encouraging them to do this because it could be dangerous. I thought this was a really interesting concept and definitely had some twists and turns I wasn't expecting. And I'm very curious to see where the next book goes with this story, because it is part of a series. And there were some things that happened in this book that makes me curious as to what they're going to do in the next book and how things are going to play out, and if it's going to have the same kind of charm that the first book did. Next up, I read The Marked Girl by Lindsay Kalingelli, and I gave this book 3.75 stars. In this book, we follow the Crown Prince Cedric, who finds himself in a strange new world known as LA. He went through a portal to escape an evil traitor trying to take over his kingdom, and is now trapped in LA with a couple of his friends. Shortly after ending up in LA, he meets a girl named Liv, who is soon drawn into their quest to return home. As she and Cedric bond, they soon learn that Liv has a surprising connection to Cedric's home world, and that getting home is going to be harder than he thought. So I thought this was a really cool concept for a novel, because usually when you're reading these fantasies with other worlds and portals, It is somebody from our world traveling to a strange fantasy land. So I like that Cedric and his friends ended up here and were completely baffled because LA is a very, very strange place to people who live in a fantasy realm. And it was interesting to see how they adapted to the things going on. I liked seeing Liv and Cedric's relationship develop. Although this book definitely has a bit of the insta connection, insta love between Liv and Cedric, and that is not my favorite trope in a book. I believe this is a duology, and I do own the second book. But since I listened to this on audiobook, if I do listen to the second book, which I plan to at the moment, I would probably listen to the audiobook like I did for this one. It was interesting to see Liv try to deal with these characters who have no idea what's going on in the real world while also trying to manage her life. And I am curious enough about what is going on to pick up the second book at some point, though I don't know when. Like I said, it was a pretty interesting concept to see characters from a fantasy world end up in our world and have to try to manage that. And I will likely pick up the second book at some point. Next up, I read Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, and I gave this book 4 stars. This book fulfilled the prompt for has or will be hitting the silver screen for Magical Hopathon and classic for the Fall Into Reading Challenge. So this is essentially a book following 4 sisters, Meg, Beth, Jo, and Amy, and we get to see their lives as they grow up. I have wanted to read this book forever because so many people rave about it on BookTube and about how it's their favorite classic, and even some people who don't particularly enjoy classics love this. And I really enjoyed this book. I enjoyed the sisterly bonds in this book and getting to see the family relationships. I found it really, really easy to get through. A lot of classics, with the way they're written, I sometimes struggle with the English and the grammar and how the books flow based on the way it was written for the time period, but I did not have that problem with this book at all, which was such a pleasant surprise because I was expecting to maybe like the story, but to struggle with the way it was written to make it a bit of a slog to get through, but I did not have that problem at all. I definitely want to read the other books in this series because there are sequels to this series that follow these characters in events that happen after this book. The reason this didn't get 5 stars is probably a spoiler. So I can't really say, but there was something I wanted to happen in this book between 2 characters, and it did not happen, and I got very, very frustrated, especially when I found out what happened and where one of the characters who I wanted to have this thing happen, like, what happened to the other character, not one. So I know I'm not explaining this well, but basically one of the girls has a connection to another character we meet, and I was expecting something to come of that didn't happen, and then I didn't like what happened to the other character and what their story ended up being, so that frustrated me a little bit, but all in all, I really enjoyed this book, and I'm so glad that I finally sat down and read it. And lastly, I read Carnshaw by Catherine Applegate, and I gave this book 5 stars. So this book is one of my fall covers, and if you haven't seen my fall covers video, I'll link it below, but basically I took 5 books on my TBR whose covers reminded me of fall, explained why they reminded me of fall, and then decided to go into them blind. So I won't be talking about what this book is about here because I'm going to save that for my fall covers wrap-up where I discuss whether the book was about fall and what I thought of it. Obviously, I really loved it if I gave it 5 stars. If you have heard of this book and you do know what it's about, I would highly recommend you check it out if you have it on your TBR and you haven't read it because I really, really enjoyed it. And I look forward to my fall covers wrap-up where I can talk in depth about what this book is about and why I enjoyed it. So these are some of the books I've read recently. Have you read any of these books? If so, let me know what you thought of them in the comments section below. If you've made it this far in the video, leave me a cat emoji, like this video, and subscribe to my channel, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye!